All right, welcome everybody. Hi, I'm Paul Graham, CEO here at MedTech Innovator. Welcome to MedTech Innovator Live. This is part of our regular webinar series that we do every year as part of the MedTech Innovator Accelerator. For those of you who've never been here before, MedTech Innovator is an accelerator for companies that are a little bit downstream. So we're not looking for idea stage companies. We are finding some of the companies that are the most compelling companies from all over the world, no particular geography, trying to make sure that they're successful in bringing their technology to patients. So we're looking for companies that are already on the journey, companies that have teams and prototypes and evidence and all those things that hint that they're going to be successful, and we want to make them as successful as possible. So that's who's part of MedTech Innovator. We have 55 companies in our US program this year, 20 companies in our Asia Pacific program, 10 in our new BioTools Innovator, and another 5 companies that are part of our pediatric cohort. So we've got 85 companies in this year's program alone. And this webinar series is part of our curriculum. We do it as an open curriculum. We allow anyone on YouTube to come in and watch as well. But the idea is for us to convene experts around specific topics and make sure that they're there to answer our cohort's questions. So each of the topics that we have, each of these webinars is designed around their interests. And today is no exception. We're going to be talking about mergers and acquisitions and earnouts and exits and some interesting things related to exiting. This is something that many of the people who are a part of our cohort are very actively thinking about because they're either building their company for an exit in some cases, or perhaps they're just further down the road and they're getting closer to an exit, or they're at the very early stages of their journey and they want to make sure they're building something that is going to be suitable for an exit. So a lot of interesting topics to talk about today. I've been very fortunate over the years to be partnered with David Kassick from the MedTech Strategist. For those of you who've never attended one of the MedTech Strategist conferences or read the publication, I can tell you both of those opportunities are some of my favorite things in this industry. The publication is the best form of long-form journalism you'll find in the medtech industry, and their conferences are the best investor conferences to go to in our industry, whether you're in San Francisco or Dublin or other locations. That's where we all look forward to going every year. We all gather there, and I highly encourage you to check those things out. So look up MedTech Strategist when you get a chance. But David is one of those people who's just been, on the sidelines watching all these transactions for all these years. He knows more than probably almost anyone I know out there in terms of a history, and he stays fresh and relevant. So I'm really happy to have him here today to moderate our discussion. He'll introduce our other panelists. For those of you procedurally who are here on YouTube Live, there's a little chat box in the corner. You can post questions into that chat box, and I will monitor those and I'll pass them along during the discussion. For those of you who are here on the Zoom, who are part of our cohort, you can, as always, put your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll get to those after the first hour when we do the 30-minute Q&A. And if you have any comments, a follow-up or something that you want someone to clarify, put those into the chat. I'll monitor those and make sure David's aware of those. So with that, let me introduce David Kassick. As I mentioned, David is a longtime partner and a friend. So David, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and then introduce our other panelists?
Well, thank you, Paul, so much. That's awfully nice of you. And I will just state as the outset that I know significantly less than everybody else on the panel. So I'm going to get right into this discussion right now. It is always a delight and a pleasure to work with you, Paul, and to work with the MTI audience. So let me get right into this. And one note of housekeeping, I know that we have a 30-minute Q&A after this, and I know that some of you submitted questions. I have my own set of questions, and I will try to incorporate them. If I don't incorporate a question you've asked in the next hour session, please note that I will get to those questions during the 30 minutes. And I also encourage you, even if you haven't submitted questions, to think of them and be ready for them in the last 30 minutes. So with that, we have Casey McGlynn, lawyer extraordinaire, the most connected person I know, and a guy behind a million deals. And I thought his perspective would be absolutely critical because I I just think Casey has seen just about everything. We also have Hanson Gifford, principal of the Foundry, LightStone Ventures, the guy who has probably started more significant companies in this industry than anybody that I know of, and brings a depth of insight and experience that is certainly unparalleled, unrivaled in this space. And we have, and I saved for last, Matt Griffiths from Silicon Valley Bank, leading bank in this space. SVB has always developed phenomenal data around the industry and what's going on in terms of transactions, fundraising, and exits. And we are going to start this session, this hour session, with a presentation from Matt, who's going to share his screen so that we can get a kind of overview. And those of you who've seen the SVB data knows how incredibly valuable it is in giving us the big picture of what's going on in the industry. So I see his slides are up. Matt, I turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, and it's great to be here. As David said, Matt Griffiths, director. I run the bank's Northeast MedTech and HealthTech portfolios from a relationship management perspective. I think there's a broad group on this call. And so we wanted to put out some data to sort of highlight a lot of the content. SVB, it's our privilege to support this ecosystem, the early stage growth, innovation ecosystem, the innovation economy. That's our bread and butter. And our goal is really to kind of give everybody the tools needed to scale, whether it's a product perspective or knowledge and networks. And so excited to dig in particular into the device sector here. My colleague John Norris does this report biannually, a mid-year report, and then an end of the year report. So this is his baby. I'll do my best to sort of take you through the key slides, but looking forward to talking a little bit more about what's behind these numbers as well. So I figured I'd start with just a broad overview of for some of the earliest stage stories out there of just the current state of fundraising across healthcare in general from a private perspective. In the face of COVID, 2020 was, as you can see, a record year, pretty much across all sectors. And that growth has just continued to explode here in 21. Q1 was up over 50% from Q3 20, which was a record venture financing quarter. And as you can see, sort of the last quarter was even greater, Q2. $47 billion raised year to date. It's already close to a full year record for investments in this space. It is being piloted by the biotech and health tech sectors, but as you can see, device at just south of $4.7 billion is on track to have a record year as well. Growth not at the same cliff, stagnated a little bit by the reduction in elective surgeries. I'm sure that had an impact, but nonetheless, still good to see. Moving into sort of the concept of Series A investment, I'm sure there are some seed and Series A profiles here. After a 2-year decline, it's exciting to see that Series A investment is up again in the first half of 20. Heavy focuses in non-invasive monitoring, neurology, and imaging. Non-invasive monitoring from a subsector perspective, a high focus within cardiovascular. And then for Series A in neurology, we saw multiple deals, both in neurostim and then brain-computer interface tech. Overall in device, as you see in this slide, we saw $700 million deals, and then another 14 between 50 and 100. We saw a whole host of constituents in terms of the funding sources. One interesting note, it's on another slide in this, but corporate investment was actually down in the first half of this year, which, always a pretty steady hand in terms of the early stage funding within this space. As you would expect, some of the larger deals fall into the surgical robotics space, both in terms of the surgical tools themselves, as well as imaging tech for the surgery. We also saw some upsize in terms of Series B deals led by new investors, which I think for those that have been in the space a while, that's typically that inflection point where you start to see a bit of a drop off. So a really good sign for this group. And then valuations, as far as a step up in the bottom right, 2.1x up from 1.6x in the prior year's cohort. Heading over to more of the other side of the equation, IPOs and M&A saw strong exit activity across the device space for the first half of this year. IPOs were close to full year highs, led by 2 high-performing venture-backed IPOs in Shanghai. While medium pre-money valuations and dollars raised dropped more than 50% from 2020, post-IPO performance averaged 120%, which for the 4th year in a row makes device the best performing subsector of healthcare from a public perspective. Post-IPO performance for the last 3 classes, 2019 and 18, were all up in 21 based on strong growth. And we expect, based on some of the private high revenue growth profiles we see in our portfolios, as well as some of the strong clinical milestones we're seeing, we expect this volume to continue into 21. On the M&A side, numbers and deals are both up. We saw a new breed of acquirers, which was actually, for this group is very compelling for years. It's been in the big corporates. We've seen a nice crop of sort of small to mid-sized publics that are, building war chests and putting money to play as far as roll-ups and acquisitions, folks like NuVasive, Exonics, Simonetics. And so that, as far as exits, whereas M&A for a long time was run by the big guys, we're starting to see a little bit more volume and a few more avenues in terms of other types of companies, which is great. 2 largest M&A deals in 21 were non-invasive monitoring deals focused on cardiovascular and Preventus and Barty. We also saw 3 M&A activities in orthopedics. Jumping to the last side, and I'll keep this brief. 14 M&A transactions year to date. As you can see, 11 have been commercial profiles, 3 were clinical phase. Interestingly, and what is great to see is, whereas historically we've only seen 50 to 60% of that value from a commitment perspective earned at close, that number so far this year is up over 80%, with the rest being tied to milestones. Also pretty interesting to see the time to exit at around 6 years. Compare those metrics to biotech. Average time to exit within the biotech private market, just north of 5 years. Dollars are higher, but the upfront is lower. And then in the bottom right, you'll get a sense for the classes of device in terms of some of these exits. Pretty interesting to see sort of a clean split between 510K and M&A. And PMA. So I figured that's a good place to start. As I said, John is the architect here. He's a great guy. He's always happy to answer questions, as am I. Happy to send this report out to anybody else that hasn't seen it. And it's a much broader piece covering all sectors. So interesting read, whether you're in this sector or another. So looking forward to chatting with everybody.
Great, Matt. Thank you so much. That was a great overview. Too brief, but I think it gives us a sense of what's going on in the industry. And the one comment that I would make coming out of your slides is that I was struck by what really, for the first time ever, particularly in a year in which the industry was really waxed by the pandemic, of how positive these numbers are, how good the numbers are. So let me bring Casey and Hanson into this discussion right now and ask whether, as you think about a longer trajectory and longer history of deal making, whether the numbers that you've seen right now are, do you think, sustainable? In other words, is it time to think differently about the opportunities and options for companies who are thinking about either Series A raises or ultimate exits? An environment in which we're seeing bigger and more robust deals, or are you cautious that this might be, if not exactly an outlier, it might not be as sustainable as one would hope? Hanson, you've been on a lot of sides of some of the some really outstanding deals in this industry. So let me get a sense from you and from Casey about how you assess those numbers compared to what might be a practical take on exits and fundraising.
Well, David, thank you and Paul for having me on this. Honored to be a part of this. I think as Matt just laid out, it's a really exciting time for the industry. There is an upswing. I think that really last year's numbers were affected obviously by COVID, and had that not been happening, the numbers would have been up last year too. We're in a great place because a lot of startups have created a lot of value. They have exciting technologies in spaces that relate to big clinical needs and big market opportunities. And so there's a pent up value, I think, that is being recognized by acquirers and by the market at this point. So, back several years ago, some banker did an analysis indicating that there were about 50 companies in the medical device space that got sold every year, and it was incredibly stable. I think that we may be ready to see those numbers go up, not just for this year, but for several years into the future, given the number of great companies out there. Casey?
Well, I want to get Casey's. So let me ask you one question. I know you tracked for a while exits in this industry. Has that database, to your mind, changed and improved? Because when we did an article based on your data, it was several years ago. I'm trying to remember. I shouldn't even. But I mean, I guess the fun about the question is that reflected in the database that you compile, if you're still compiling it?
Yeah, that data was from a long time ago. That was like back in 2011 when we were in a real tough spot as an industry after the market crash, and a lot of venture funds failed to raise new funds at that time and so on. I was thinking what was going to happen to all the companies that were out there. And it's been remarkable how there's been a very slow, gradual set of exits from those legacy companies, 2008 and before. But some of them, which have been out there a long time, are getting to great exits. CVRX, which Matt just showed on his slides, and HeartFlow, two companies that are 20 years old, but creating great value. So, I think the current market conditions are recognizing the value in those companies as well.
So Casey, you live this every day. You probably represent more companies who are raising capital and attempting to exit on opposite sides of the barbell. Well, how do you read these numbers? Do you think we're seeing some pent-up demand, or do you think the world has changed and is valuing MedTech more than it has certainly a decade or so ago?
Yeah, I feel like this is just such a great time. I'm not actually sure what all of the factors are that are causing it. The whole U.S. economy is, on a tear, and I feel like digital health, which has grown to be such a huge piece. I think there's some maybe some flow off effects for us also. Those investors, I think, are becoming more and more comfortable with the medical device industry, and seeing those as two different markets. Maybe there may be a convergence here between these two markets, where we begin to look at it much more as a one gigantic whole, and all of that will, I think, help us in the medical device industry, with regard to having more and more venture capitalists that can help seed and grow these companies. So I do feel like this is a pretty good time right now. And I think, honestly, the amount of inventiveness is also incredible, because I keep thinking, okay, it's an increase in the money supply. There's all these venture guys coming into the industry, but I also continue to see incredible new things being developed at Stanford, at Johns Hopkins, and around the country, and even just doctors coming up with things that are quite transformative, and these are way off that you won't see above the surface of the ocean for another few years. But there's a lot of very interesting things going on.
Yeah, and I would certainly argue that this is maybe more sustainable than a cynic might suggest. Matt, I was struck in your final comments by your comment that, you know, what we're seeing in the M&A side isn't just the usual big six, but that more and more new players are coming into the marketplace. I was talking to a VC a couple of years ago who was equally balanced in his portfolio between MedTech and Biotech. And he said his one issue with MedTech is that in comparison with Biotech, you know, there's always multiple companies that are bidders, that would be bidders for his portfolio companies. But in MedTech, there are so few. We wrote an article called Buyer Beware, WHERE, because there were so few. At the same time, I've spoken to MedTech business development guys who've said, look, as long as there are two companies in this, in your company, you're fine. You don't need a dozen companies bidding for your company. I wonder how, well, Matt, if you could just maybe elaborate a little bit on who you see as some of the new players in this space and whether that's, again, sustainable, whether we're going to see these players step in for the Medtronics and the Boston Scientifics and the J&Js. And from Casey and Hanson, your perspective is how important is it to have an auction to generate competition for these deals rather than pursuing a one-on-one strategy in terms of negotiating with companies?
Maybe I'll kick it off with sort of three thoughts, and it, you know, applies to my day job, but from a lending perspective, you know, a lot of these companies, most companies across most of the sectors that I work with, the concept of platform and a larger tool belt is sort of front and center in terms of value versus some of the more traditional metrics, I'd say. And so, you know, especially as, you know, this digital element of it that was highlighted continues to grow and sort of creates this gray area in terms of what's MedTech, what's health tech. You know, I think this ability to, whether it's getting to the home, keep people out of the hospital, the shift to value where there's downstream economics that are potentially there for these device companies. You know, I think you have a lot, obviously the big guys are thinking about all that as well, but there's a little bit more red tape. There's some, you know, some more people at the table. Some of these growth stage, mid-stage companies that sort of see an opportunity to tackle those, you know, those, whether it's data-based or whether it's some sort of wearable concept to be more ever present with the patient. I think they're jumping at it. So it's interesting for sure, but I do think the health tech, digital health influence on the space is sort of bringing a lot of the non-traditional, even some of the you know, you see it with the Apples, et cetera, right, that are a little bit more interested in this space.
And are we seeing those guys make deals? I mean, it's interesting that you say that. I was on a panel a couple of years ago with a bunch of investors who were pure tech investors. And I said to one of them, I'm just amazed that a tech company, a tech investor, tech venture capitalists would be interested in medical devices because the valuation returns are so different. And he said, no, you're wrong. This is a really attractive space to us. So I think what you're saying is reflected in the marketplace. But have we seen those big tech companies, all of whom seem to be nibbling around healthcare, begin to actually buy companies?
The buy piece, a little less. I kind of look at it as, in terms of the venture arms of something, you know, that's where a lot of my data sits, right, is sort of the venture arms of these big companies as far as their activity, and whether it's kind of dipping their feet in or sort of pay to play early. We are seeing that corporate side in the traditional sense, which actually was a little bit down, but I think we're seeing some of that non-traditional sort of venture arm, not off the balance sheet type early stage relationship building that is sort of hopefully going to lead to some more strategic exits.
So Casey and Hanson, let me bring you guys into this because it does raise the question. I mean, I think particularly over the course of the last decade or so, we've seen more and more advice to companies that they begin to talk to strategics sooner, earlier in their trajectory, keep them abreast of how the company is developing. How important is it to your mind to create an auction or a competitive environment when you're beginning to think about an exit? And how is that preferable to having a one-on-one discussion with folks? I want to talk in a minute about build to buy as a new approach to doing this, which is the ultimate you commit to one company. But should companies be thinking about generating interest in as many companies as possible, or sticking with one identified acquirer and really trying to work closely with them? I will say I've had people argue with me that the worst way to get a valuation is to do an auction, because in an auction everybody bids low. I don't know if that's true.
Well, I just say oftentimes the auction is populated by very few potential acquirers, and that becomes quite obvious as the investment bank, moves around in a circle of the companies that are interested, and all of a sudden only has one person to talk to. So that's the problem with an auction, is you're trying to force the time for a buyer to buy, as opposed for the buyer to look at you, fall in love with you, and then begin to negotiate with you on a one-on-one basis. So it is, but sometimes we don't have the choice. We have no choice but to do it that way if capital is low. But I do think that, it's can be a very frustrating process.
So Hanson, what do you think? And maybe this is a time to embark upon a discussion of build to buy. I know, Casey, you have strong feelings about that as well. But build to buy is the ultimate. Find one guy and work with them, and that's it.
So I would just, on the auction discussion, my advice to every company is that once you have your IP nailed down, start talking to all potential acquirers. It's a very long-term process. Big companies can seem very opaque, very slow-moving, very slow to understand the brilliant value proposition that your little company has, but they'll get it if you keep updating them every several months, again and again. People, who you've spent a year or two educating will move on to another role, and you'll have to start over again with someone else. But all of that process is worthwhile if you can demonstrate that you have a value proposition, and that you build trust with them as a company leader, that you say, hey, in the next 6 months, I'm going to accomplish these things. And you come back 6 months later and say, yes, I did accomplish those things, and here's what I'm going to accomplish in the next round. And all of that work, which is a ton of work, I must say, means that when you get to that time of starting an auction, you have prepared buyers. And in that auction process, as Casey says, there might actually only be 1 or 2 or 3 real buyers who are able, willing to entertain the kind of price that you're looking for, but you don't know who they are. And so that preparation process and launching into an auction will bring those few people to the table.
So any thoughts or insights from any of you about how big companies think about valuations around M&A? I know in doing this for a long time, big company biz dev guys always tell me that they use strict formulas and they never overpay, and there's a lot of discipline in the process. And then you see some deals and you say to yourself, that the valuations just seem to come out of, we would say, where. So if I'm a small company and I'm thinking that I'm going to do, how do I know whether I should keep pressing these guys because they're lowballing me, or how can I anticipate what I might get in terms of valuation on my company?
Wow, that's such a tough question. Honestly, I do feel like talking to people and being polite and making sure they understand how powerful your idea is great. And if you're only talking to one person, it is hard to move the needle once they make an offer, and unless they think that you have some alternatives, or you can wait it out and make some more progress with regard to your product. So trying to create a competitive, competitive is not really the right word, but a place where you have alternatives, either take more money to move the project farther downstream, or to, work with other people. You just want to make sure you're not stuck in a corner with the guy with a checkbook that's got the wrong number of zeros behind it.
So Matt, I know you compile a lot of kind of broad data in valuations, but I mean in M&A dollars. Are you seeing any trends in valuations? Are companies getting more generous? Are they reaching deeper, particularly as new companies are coming in? Or would you agree with the biz dev guys that there is discipline? They apply the same metrics and valuation models to companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think in that cohort, yes. Well, I think from an exit perspective, right, with that being, I think where things flipped, it ties into the IPO discussion a little bit. I think what became really interesting is I think historical multiples on an M&A front 5 to 10 years ago was something like 4 to 5x. I think when you look at the valuations from an IPO perspective, so that new avenue, that other direction that they can go, that number is a little closer to 8 to 9x, right? Which is interesting, right? Because it creates that interplay between, for the right companies, right, that can sort of say, hey, I've got this other option. It gives them the ability to sort of leverage that in a sense with whomever's on the other side of the table. Now, that's a very specific profile, but in a traditional sense, unless I think it really ties into, what type of process is being run. Obviously, if you're approached, that I think the ability to leverage that to see what else is out there is very compelling, and it's worthwhile. That being said, the build to buy concept certainly plays into something that I say all the time, which is not all money's green. Sometimes having that one partner that's been there early, supported you, it's sort of worth knowing that you're in good hands versus running that broader process to just find more capital, because at the very least, where where there's a future for that company you just poured yourself into. So yeah, so just from a data perspective, I do think there is room with the continued success from an IPO perspective to maybe push, but I think very much, I haven't seen that in the data.
So technically, build to buy is not the same as taking an investment from corporates. And Matt, you noted that the corporate investment was actually declined a little bit. Does doing a build to buy compromise in any way your exit? Hanson, you've done a bunch of these. How great is the risk that the corporate partner that you're working with on build to buy will not ultimately pull the trigger and acquire the company? Or is the build to buy strategy specifically done to make the potential buyer so comfortable and so invested in the project that becomes an assured exit?
Well, I would say nothing's ever assured. And so many things can change. Both the company can fail to execute on its vision. It can see disappointing clinical results. The strategic company's strategy can change, and so on. So nothing is assured, but I do think that the build to buy model can reduce the risk of financing, the risk of an acquisition, and so on. And again, there are all flavors, from deals where there's an absolute commitment to buy the company and some kind of a put, to an option, etc. One of the things that we try to do as we've stepped into these is try to make sure that the business we're working on is an area of interest to other acquirers, so that if for whatever reason the acquirer doesn't step up, even after having been involved in investing for all this time, there are other players that might be interested. So having options and hedging risk is important. But I do think having the money from a committed partner over the long term can be a fantastic way to reduce risk, both financing risk overall, but also the risk of dilution as new financings happen.
So Casey, you work with a lot of very early stage companies, and you and I have talked a lot about build to buy. Are you a fan of the model? Are you guardedly optimistic? What's your take on build to buy?
Well, I would just say that, I would say I've seen a bunch of projects get started and not get finished. So not every, if the product development doesn't go as planned, it's very easy for the for the potentially acquiring company to step back and end it. And so that's one piece I think that's very puzzling. I mean, not puzzling, but risky for people. So you really have to understand, what you're stepping into. The second piece is, I would say, for the founders of that company, if founders is the right word, the return may be more predictable, but it's probably a lot lower than if you have a great new idea and you're able to find capital from an independent third party. Because what happens right now today is many of these build to buys now are, Medtronics needing a next generation product and going out and deciding that's what they want to do and finding a shop that'll help them. And as part of that, of course, you have to find some venture capitalists. And everybody is there fighting over the little piece of the company that there is. And of course, the venture capitalists have the money. They're going to be stronger than the founders. And so the piece that's left for the founders in many of these transactions is maybe okay. But if anything goes wrong, it's probably going to be not really that good a deal. And so it's really a very difficult situation. So it's getting, I'd say some of these deals turn out to be pretty lean.
So I want to pursue that in just a second when we talk about earnouts. But let me just ask if I'm getting you right, and that what you're basically saying is, if you believe you got a truly disruptive technology, you may be better trying to raise capital and going on your own. But if you've got something that just absolutely fits the big company's portfolio and would feel more like a tuck-in, that build to buy might be a reasonable strategy.
Yeah, so I feel like there's room for all of these kinds of approaches. Some technologies, next generation technologies, they may be much better than the prior one, but they may not be revolutionary. But I think if you've got a revolutionary technology, something that's going to change the world, then I think, we should go for the fences. And I think you'll have a lot of choices there if people can see your vision. And if it's, if you have the capabilities to, make that happen. So you need to have the right kind of people associated with you. You have to have a, kind of a track record in many cases. But there is a lot of things that are going on right now that are quite revolutionary. Companies that I never thought would actually get to the edge, the edge of the atmosphere are now, have now proven that this thing works in a big way that's very transformational. And now they've got where they had almost no choices, except one last investor that would throw the money on the table and shake their head in despair. Now, there's this huge group of investors that are around it. The company might have moved from what was, a $50 million valuation with $100 million into the company to $800 or $900 million valuation today in a private placement or something. It's just an amazing change in what's possible today.
Briefly, because I want to get some other topics, but Hanson, do you agree? You've done a bunch of these deals, and the Foundry has been, as I say, one of the most prolific, if not the most prolific, developer of new technology. Are there some technologies that you think are absolutely appropriate for a build to buy an earlier intervention, or is it pretty much good for any structure, for any kind of technology?
I would completely agree with Casey's characterizations. There are some things that are big ideas that are worth, really developing independently, keeping the strategics out as long as possible. Some that might make more sense for a build to buy are ones where you have a really long development cycle, and the real proof is going to come, 8-9 years from now. If a strategic is willing to fund the early development and acquire at a relatively early stage, that can make more sense.
So Matt, sorry,
nobody's going to go, adopt a new hip implant until they have 10-year data. And so for a startup to launch into a hip implant company doesn't make sense. If there's a great new idea though, and you can get a strategic to fund that development, could make great sense.
So Matt, I hope I heard what you said correctly. I want to talk about earnouts because you seem to suggest your data shows that the earnouts are actually getting a little bit more generous than they've been, that more money's on the table. Not the earnouts are more generous, that more money's being put up front, which suggests that companies are eager to do it. Earnouts, I know, are always a tricky subject because the question is, are you really incentivizing the company and building in greater value, or are you really hedging your bet if you're a big company? So give us a little more information about what we're seeing in trends of earnouts, and then I'd like to invite Casey and Hanson to give their perspective on some advice for companies and how to think about earnouts.
Yeah, I mean, as far as hard details, it's every deal's a little bit different, right? But I mean, I think the one thing to know, just in terms of that metric of sort of more at close, is that it, for the most part, dollars are right around where they've been. It's the price points are a little bit lower, so in a sense, it's hard. 88% is high. Will that sustain? I think it's hard to tell. All of these acquirers in some way, shape, or form, EPS drives pretty much every decision that they make, and so thus the thought process of putting more in with risk still on the table, whether it's clinical or kind of proving that this thing can be sold, they're always going to play with a little bit of caution. So in short, I don't have the full color on the why. It could be driven by some of that competition I highlighted, but certainly earnouts, I don't think in this space are really gonna go anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, Hanson, when we were talking for this panel discussion the other day, you noted that only about a third of the earnouts actually get paid, and you said if you are comfortable with the upfront, do the deal. If you're not, don't bank on the earnout. If I'm interpreting you correctly, give us your thoughts on earnouts and advice for companies when they're thinking about it.
So that is my first thought, that you have to be happy if you get the upfront and never see another dime. Are you willing to do the deal? And if so, great, take the money and just mentally, assume that any additional payments are icing on the cake. So I would come at earnouts in an M&A discussion in that way. I would also say that you can make some estimates. If you have a new lure adapter and you get paid some extra money when sales hit $10 billion, you can guess that one's probably not gonna happen. But you can make some estimates. One of the things that trips a remarkable number of earnouts, prevents them from happening, is time limits. If sales don't hit X in the next 4 years or whatever, and you just be surprised how there's always a year or two of transition as the company is integrated into the new strategic, and sales take a hit while the sales team learns to present it and so on. And so be conservative on timelines as you negotiate that. But the strategic is buying, they're going to pay a certain amount up front. If the company turns into a big win down the road, then at that time, they're probably going to be happy to give you some more. So don't hesitate to ask for some speculative earnout payments that happen when the product turns into a big success, because the strategic may have less hesitation in offering those. So
Casey, share with us your view on earnouts. I know that you have some cautions about them, but I mean, if I'm being offered, $750 million, but it's heavily weighted toward earnouts versus $500 million, and more of that's up front, is there a way you advise clients about which of those two deals are better to take? Is better to take?
Well, here's the thing. Even if you have earnout conditions, that you're convinced you can meet, you are very unlikely to meet them unless the management team that's in place today stays at the company. Because as soon as the management team is replaced by the existing companies, they are going to be focused on what that company wants to do with the product and not with the earnout payments. So when I look back at all of the earnouts I've done over the last 40 some years, I can tell you about two huge successes. First was my very first acquisition, Advanced Cardiovascular Systems. There we had a super strong CEO, super experienced, very focused on manufacturing and development of advanced technologies at ACS. And he had calculated a 5-year earnout and made every one of the payments except for the first earnout payment. And it happened because he did not leave, because he was a soldier of the entire company and would not leave and kept his people there and made sure they were properly incented from the very beginning to make the earnout. The second one is 40 years later, Josh McHour's Neotract. Again, the day before we closed the transaction, or maybe it was a week, we heard that the CEO was not planning to stay on. And Josh pulled him aside and said, hey, you've got to stay. And because he stayed, we made every one of the earnout payments. So that company grew into $1 billion company and made every one or almost every one of those payments. And those are the two hugest successes I can tell you in 40 years. But it's all about the CEO, a executor, a guy that knows exactly how to run a company, and he commits to stay. Now, today, when you look at groups inside these companies, most of their wealth is created over a 15-year period of time by jumping from company to company to company. So I think you have to be very cynical about what the likelihood of success is with regard to these earnout payments. And indeed, when I look back over them, it's not that we don't get anything, but we don't get nearly what we could get if we had a management team that stuck together and executed for the company.
And I should point out for those who are not as old as the rest of us, that ACS is the foundational angioplasty company. They're the guys who basically created angioplasty. So that your point raises a question an issue that Hanson raised, which is a lot of it depends on whether the team, or the acquiring company will execute on selling the product afterwards. And, there are examples where the biz dev team negotiates the deal and the sales source says, screw you, I'm not interested in that technology, or I don't want to take an early stage unfounded technology. I'd rather just sell the stuff I'm always selling. Give us some thoughts or perspectives on how you negotiate the post-acquisition arrangements. What can you do to make certain that your technology is going to get the attention it needs to make that earnout? Hanson,
honestly, I think they're buying the company because they don't have an alternative typically, or they have an unsatisfactory alternative. So if you're actually able to execute on your vision, it's going to be it has the best chance in the hands of an existing sales force than one that you're going to build over the next few years. So you look at a company like Stryker, they have a vaunted sales organization, and they can do almost anything with a good product, and they can get into those places and really grow that business. The problem is that they are incredibly inflexible in the negotiation of a deal with an earnout. They're happy to give you an earnout, but they're also not happy to give you any influence on what they're going to do. And I understand it's a big company. They want to run their company their own way. But things like 6 months, 8 months late in launching the product, you lose your first 2, 3 earnout payments because, none of the stuff that we all plan to do happen. And we just have to be realistic. That's a big company. They're going to run it the way they want to. And if you don't have a guy in place that's actually got the power to drive it, it's just, you got to realize it's just a crapshoot about whether you're going to get those payments or not.
Yeah, I'd echo Casey's comments about it. It comes down to the leadership of the acquired company. They need to stay on board. Andrew Cleland, as an example, committed to staying on board after 12 was acquired by Medtronic. And the entire team stayed there for 2 years. Nobody left to make sure that the product got well into its clinical trial and development happened. And in addition to leading the team and keeping them on track, there was a lot of effort by Andrew to get resources from the corporation, the budgets they needed, the attention they needed, the connections to physicians, et cetera, to make it happen. So it comes down to that leadership. And,
So,
and you have
you
to
were
structure
right.
it.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just gonna say you have to structure it so that the leadership of the acquired company has an incentive to hang around and make that happen. That may be additional earnouts, that may be reserving a portion of an extra portion of any earnout for that team.
So we're just under 10 minutes left to go in this general discussion. Let me get to 2 or 3 other points quickly, and one of which is, I guess this is a kind of multifaceted question. How often do earnout debates scuttle a deal? And if not often, what does scuttle deals? What makes deals go wrong? I know I've been involved myself in deals where the acquiring company changes the terms regularly. Is that just something you have to put up with? Is that rare? What scuttles deals, and would you allow an earnout debate or discussion to scuttle a deal? Hanson, you want to start?
I don't think the earnout discussion is going to typically scuttle the deal. As we said before, the upfront price, if that makes sense for both sides, then the earnout is a secondary issue. I think there are often events at either company, whether it's bad clinical outcomes or recalls or strategic shifts at the acquiring company that could lead to it. Also, just really trust is a key point. Acquirers are acquiring an unknown company, and as they dive into diligence, if they find that things aren't as they were presented, that's an issue. So building trust is really important.
So I want to get Casey's perspective on this, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is that it's really the deal terms don't really scuttle the deal. It's the performance of the company and other stuff that happens in the course of the development of the company. Casey, do you have a perspective on what messes deals up? What's going on?
Yeah, I honestly, I feel like when we're selling an advanced technology, what's attracting them is they know this market and they want the next generation product. And they're looking at each clinical trial we do to make sure that that product is going to work in the way that they anticipate, because many times, we're in early clinicals when they're moving to buy this company. And if their vision is correct, the vision that they have about what this product could do, then then it really makes sense for them to buy it. But if the product has surprising disappointments with regard to features of it or its ability to achieve their vision with regard to this next generation product, then as they watch these cases, they go back and they got to second guess. They begin to second guess themselves about whether or not this is the right product. So honestly, it is so often about product characteristics and then how those clinical trials are supporting that position. And in many cases, the things that the cases that create doubt are the engineers inside these companies are later able to correct them, figure out exactly what's not right with the product, and salvage the situation. So sometimes that happens and the deal goes forward. Sometimes it's already collapsed, and we have to go talk to some investors about why they should continue to fund this thing because we've quote unquote found a new solution.
Okay, well, this has been an interesting discussion.
Let me add one last detail here, which is that corporations are in the space. They know a lot about it, but they defer to key opinion leaders. And they're absolutely going to go out and ask those KOLs,
Right.
what do they think of the product? And so figuring out which KOLs each strategic likes to talk to, tracking them down, educating them about the product, and persuading them that of the value of the opportunity that you represent is really important, so that when they do get the call from that strategic, they are not caught blind. They're not say, I don't know anything about that little company. They can say, oh yes, I know that company. You know, here's what they're doing. Here's how it's going to work. It makes sense to me. That's really important.
That's a really good point. I think you could do a whole session on KOLs and scientific advisory boards. Matt, what were you going to say?
Just 2 points on that. One is, I think everyone probably already knows this, but you need that champion, right? Internally, there's a lot of doors you need to kick down, right, within these big industry, big corporations. Finding that champion that can help you do it can move things along. But if there are where you see things fall apart is when that champion either leaves or is let go. The other thing I'll say from a banker perspective, we get these calls all the time, and it's maybe a pitch to folks on the finance side, which is we see these deals, we get the call saying, hey, we're close to signing, but we're running out of cash, and they're really crunching us in terms of valuation, and there are things getting drawn out. We need the cash. So it's going into those processes on fumes is something that we see all the time, that maybe the fit is there. It's a perfect marriage, but the timing is just tough. That's just something to be thoughtful of heading into those processes.
So I've left too little time to talk about the IPOs. Maybe we can steal a minute or two from the next 30-minute session. But, for a long time, the message to small startups was there's really only one viable exit. It's M&A, and don't worry, it's okay, because big companies like to acquire. It does feel now like, and Matt, maybe you have a perspective, is that the IPO window is there, it's open, it's real, you can get real valuation. So how does a company now assess whether they should choose an M&A route or whether they should choose an IPO route? I mean, I know companies that basically file for IPOs only to stimulate and establish the valuation on their M&A deal. So is this a time now when companies are really legitimately asking, I'd rather, maybe I should be doing an IPO rather than M&A, rather than acquisition?
Well, let me just give you an example of a company that
Sure.
just closed a financing. So I won't mention their name, but this is a company that has some of the most revolutionary technology I've ever seen. But it's had more problems with regard to developing that product than almost anybody I've ever known. But they've got the product now. It works. It's incredible. But they've had, a limited number of investors that were willing to keep throwing the coins into the coin box. And now, because they have this incredible clinical data, the guys that want to get in before an IPO come in, put $100 million into the company, and are willing now to really support it at really great valuations. So I would just say, if you have a revolutionary product, you have multiple opportunities today to figure out where you want to go. And I think even with a deal where we do a late stage financing at more than $100 million pre-money kind of thing, I feel like it's only going to make the acquirers that are out there who have to own these key technologies pay a higher price. So it's going to be a good thing for this industry in a way you just maybe don't appreciate, because as those companies go public and become giant companies, they're going to, because they have this new incredible technology, they're going to get eventually bought by one of these big companies probably. But instead of doing it at $500 million, it'll be at $6 billion. And it'll be fantastic. I feel like that's fantastic for the industry, because those kind of wins drive more brilliant people into this industry, bring more venture capital into this industry, bring more interest by the mezzanine players, and obviously the big companies want to play too. So I feel like this is the kind of thing that we've been waiting for honestly like 15 years. And I feel like we've gone through our hell, and we're now back at a place where things have radically changed with regard to the way these companies are getting funded. And I'm very, very excited about what I'm seeing today.
So I see Paul's right there. He wants to get us into the Q&A. But very quickly, Hanson, Matt, is the message now rethink your view about public offerings, because they're really viable, and as Casey suggests, they can generate more value down the road?
Well, I think it's super exciting, some of the IPOs that have happened, and a great thing, as Casey says, for our industry. I would just add that when you look at those really successful companies, Silk Road, with the great leadership of Erica Rogers, Shockwave with Doug Godshaw, Inari, what they're doing, they are executing really well to beat their numbers every quarter. And I can tell you there's no, lower circle of hell than to be a public company missing your revenue and every other forecast, and your valuation is going to evaporate pretty quickly. The ability to meet your sales numbers and to have revenues and grow those is critical before you jump into an IPO. But if you can, and you can beat your numbers, then that discounted cash flow, green eye shade model that the strategic used for M&A, as we were discussing earlier, goes away. And it's, fanciful multiples of revenues based on growth out into the future that do, just change the, add zeros to your acquisition price. So it's very exciting. It's also not for every company.
So gut check time. Paul, sorry I ran a little bit over. I'll turn it back to you for right now.
Sure. Yeah, no problem at all, David. Fantastic discussion, everybody. I stayed in the background because there was so much to talk about, and I just enjoyed listening, which was great. So thank you. So again, we're here at the end of our first hour, which is the public broadcast that we do on YouTube. After that, we move to our private Q&A with our cohort, which we're going to do now in a minute or so. But I just want to wrap up and thank David for being a terrific moderator, David, as always. So thank you for that. Thank you, Hanson, Matt, Casey, and for being just a terrific set of panelists here. Great discussion, really interesting points, and really enjoy having you guys on this broadcast. And you're all going to stick around for our Q&A, but just quickly, Hanson, let me start with you. If people want to find you, to reach out to you, are you active on LinkedIn? Should they go to your website? How do they find you?
I am. I'm on LinkedIn, and my email is simply hanson@thefoundry.com. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Hanson. And Matt, I know SVB, you guys got a great team. Thanks for sharing those slides earlier. How do people find you?
You know what? M Griffiths at svb.com is the easiest way. After this, I'll send around the broader report that has some of our information in it as well. That way, if there are questions or thoughts, happy to get more
Perfect
as well.
Yeah, that's great.
And a link to the report in the chat room.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yep. For the cohort, there's a link in the chat, and for everyone on YouTube, I'll put it into the show notes here, into the comments. And then Casey, great seeing you as always. Casey, how do people find you?
Yes, sure. LinkedIn or my email, cmcglynn@wsgr.com.
Excellent. Thank you. And David, how do they find you?
LinkedIn is one way. Preferably would be email, but d.kassick@medtechinnovator.com. And that's probably the best way is email if you can find me. We also have a website, medtechstrategist.com, and can get to me through that.
Yeah, I think dcassick@medtechstrategist.com would probably be good. All right. Excellent. Thank you very much. Again, for everyone who's joined us on YouTube, I'm going to stop the stream. Please join us next week for another in our series. You can go to medtechinnovator.org/live to see the whole schedule of our upcoming panels. We also have medtechinnovator.org/APAC live for our Asia Pacific panels. And we're also going to have one for our BioTools program. So lots of great discussions coming up. So thank you for all who've joined us here on YouTube.